"Get us a real waiter," she hissed, just loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Not him!" The crystal water pitcher nearly slipped from Dr. Andre Thompson's grip as Elizabeth Whitfield deliberately bumped his arm while taking her seat at table 14. Water splashed onto the pristine white tablecloth, droplets catching the light from 14 tables' elegant chandeliers. "Oh!" Elizabeth exclaimed with exaggerated concern, her diamond bracelet glittering as she dramatically pulled her designer purse away from the spreading moisture. "You've made quite a mess." Andre quickly produced a cloth from his pocket, dabbing at the spill while maintaining his professional composure. "My apologies, ma'am. Let me... Is this really the caliber of service here?" Harrison Whitfield interrupted loudly, adjusting his gold cufflinks as he scanned the dining room. Several heads turned toward the commotion. "We were told this was Washington's premier restaurant." The soft jazz from the trio in the corner faltered momentarily as the pianist glanced toward the disruption. Andre straightened, pitcher still in hand, his white shirt now spotted with water droplets that he ignored with practiced dignity. "I assure you, sir," Andre began, his voice steady despite the familiar heat rising in his chest. Harrison raised his hand abruptly, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Rachel!" he called out, beckoning imperiously to the young hostess who was escorting another couple to their table. "Could you come here immediately?" Rachel hurried over, nearly tripping in her haste. At 23 and only 2 months into this job, her cheeks flushed with nervous anticipation. "Yes, Mr. Whitfield?" she asked, clutching leather-bound menus against her chest. "We need a different server," Harrison stated flatly, not bothering to lower his voice. He pointed across the restaurant to where Dylan, a young white server, was attending to another table. "Someone more experienced, like him." Elizabeth nodded emphatically, using her napkin to wipe imaginary water from her sleeve. "We're friends with Senator Calloway," she added, name-dropping with practiced ease. "He wouldn't be pleased to hear about this incident." Andre's dark fingers tightened around the pitcher handle, knuckles tensing as he maintained his professional stance, back straight, expression neutral. Chef Martine Leroux emerged from the kitchen just then, wiping her hands on her apron as she assessed the situation with narrowed eyes. Unlike Rachel, Martine knew exactly who Andre was and why he was here. Andre gave Rachel a subtle nod, permission to do what she felt necessary, before stepping back with practiced grace. The young hostess visibly relaxed at his silent approval. With 2 advanced degrees, a PhD in food chemistry and an MBA from Wharton, Andre wasn't actually a waiter at all. The condensation from the water pitcher dampened his fingers as he discreetly reached for the small notebook tucked in his back pocket, making a quick notation about the encounter. For the past 6 weeks, he'd been working undercover at 14 tables, gathering data for his hospitality consulting firm that specialized in transforming toxic workplace cultures. The restaurant's owner, James Chen, had specifically recruited him after receiving several discrimination complaints, smart enough to see the writing on the wall. Evolve, or become irrelevant. Rachel scurried away to summon Dylan while the Whitfields loudly discussed their plans to meet the Secretary of State later that week, their voices calibrated to carry to neighboring tables. Andre moved to the service station where he carefully set down the water pitcher and continued making notes. "I'm so sorry," Rachel whispered when she returned, unable to meet his eyes. "They're insisting on Dylan taking over?" "I understand. Table 14 prefers someone else." Andre's voice remained calm, betraying none of the calculations happening behind his steady gaze. He watched as Dylan approached the Whitfields, who immediately brightened and sat up straighter, extending their hands in greeting, a courtesy they hadn't offered Andre. Chef Martine approached, her tall white toque adding to her commanding presence. "Incident number 48? She asked quietly, nodding toward Andre's notebook. 48 in the past month alone, he confirmed, closing his notebook with a soft snap. Each incident meticulously documented, categorized, and analyzed for patterns that could inform industry-wide changes. Will Andre abandon his research to preserve his dignity? Or is this exactly the data point he's been waiting for? Dillon approached table 14 with an eagerness that made Andre wince internally. The 24-year-old server carried himself with the artificial confidence of someone still learning to navigate the complex social dynamics of fine dining. Andre watched from the periphery while attending to his remaining tables, noting how the Whitfield's demeanor transformed instantly. "Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield. My name is Dillon, and I'll be your server tonight." The words barely left his mouth before Harrison Whitfield smiled broadly. "Now this is more like it," Harrison said, loud enough for nearby diners to hear. "Tell us about your wine selection, young man. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary and want something special." Dillon's Adam's apple bobbed nervously. His knowledge of wine was rudimentary at best, a fact Andre had noted during their training sessions. The restaurant's wine cellar housed over 600 selections, with vintages dating back to 1945. Andre could see panic flashing across Dillon's face as he fumbled through generic descriptions of regions and varietals. "Perhaps a nice Bordeaux?" Dillon suggested, his voice rising slightly at the end, transforming the statement into a question. Elizabeth Whitfield's smile tightened. "We were thinking something more distinctive. Don't you have a sommelier?" Andre, who had been discreetly positioning himself near the service station, made a quick decision. He jotted down a recommendation on his order pad, folded it, and passed it to Rachel as she hurried past. The hostess, understanding immediately, slipped the note to Dillon during a momentary lull. The deep ruby color of a 2009 Chateau Margaux caught the light as Dillon poured a tasting portion for Harrison. The smooth texture of the notepaper had transferred from Dillon's fingers to Harrison's as the young server passed along Andre's suggestion, presented as his own. "Excellent choice," Harrison declared after tasting, his voice carrying the false authority of someone performing knowledge. "You know your wines better than I expected." Dillon cast a grateful glance toward Andre, who acknowledged it with the slightest nod while polishing silverware. The first successful exchange was complete. As their meal progressed, the Whitfields grew increasingly comfortable with their superiority. Elizabeth's laugh tinkled like her jewelry with each of Dillon's awkward jokes. The sharp ping of a fork against fine china punctuated Harrison's booming declarations about his latest business venture. "You know," Harrison announced after his second glass of wine, leaning back in his chair, "last month we were at Le Bernardin in New York, and the chef made us the most extraordinary off-menu dish, a butter-poached lobster with black truffle and cognac reduction. I wonder if your kitchen could recreate something similar." Dillon's smile froze. "Let me check with the chef, sir." Andre, arranging flowers at a nearby table, caught every word. The hush that fell over nearby tables amplified the sound of Dillon's shoes squeaking against the polished floor as he retreated toward the kitchen. 2 minutes later, Dillon returned, flustered, his collar now damp with perspiration. "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Whitfield, but Chef Martine says she cannot prepare dishes without proper planning and ingredients." "Cannot?" Harrison's voice rose sharply. "Do you know who we are? Call the owner. We've dined with James Chen 3 times this year." Andre knew for a fact that Chen had never mentioned meeting the Whitfields. The heat of embarrassment radiated from Dillon's neck as other diners turned to observe the disruption. Making a split-second decision, Andre stepped into the kitchen and approached Chef Martine directly. "The dish they're describing," he said quietly, showing her his phone screen with detailed notes. "It's actually from Le Bernardin's winter menu from 2 years ago. I have the exact recipe and presentation details." Chef Martine's eyebrows rose as she scanned the information. "How did you—" "I consulted for them in 2023. The dish isn't difficult, just theatrical. You have everything you need." Minutes later, Chef Martine herself emerged from the kitchen, her tall white toque adding to her commanding presence. "Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield," she announced with professional warmth, "I would be delighted to prepare this special dish for you just this once." The Whitfields beamed triumphantly at surrounding tables, oblivious to Andre's intervention. "See?" Elizabeth stage whispered to a nearby diner. "It's all about knowing how to ask." The evening progressed with the Whitfields growing increasingly comfortable in their perceived status. Andre continued his careful observations, noting how their behavior affected not just the staff, but the dining experience of everyone around them. The weight of his notebook grew heavier with each new entry. "Andre!" A booming voice cut through the ambient restaurant noise. "I thought that was you!" Andre turned to see Marcus Chen, food critic for the Washington Post and a frequent speaker at hospitality conferences. The critic's tailored suit couldn't contain his enthusiastic energy as he approached from a nearby table, hand extended. "Dr. Thompson, your keynote at the International Hospitality Summit last year completely revolutionized how I think about service psychology." Marcus shook Andre's hand vigorously, unaware of the role Andre was currently playing. "Your research on status anxiety in fine dining environments was brilliant." Andre felt the Whitfield's eyes on him from table 14. Dylan stood nearby, mouth slightly agape as he processed this new information about his colleague. The critic's voice carried throughout the restaurant's perfect acoustics, ensuring everyone heard his praise. "Thank you, Marcus. I appreciate that." Andre kept his voice measured, aware of the growing attention. "When is your new book coming out? My editor is desperate to feature it." The critic's enthusiasm was genuine, his admiration evident. Before Andre could respond, Elizabeth Whitfield interrupted, seemingly materializing beside them. The clink of ice in her water glass preceded her as she approached. "Excuse me," she said to Marcus, completely ignoring Andre despite standing inches away. "Aren't you Marcus Chen, the food critic? We'd love your recommendations for dining in Aspen next month." Marcus blinked, clearly puzzled by the rudeness of her interruption and the way she looked through Andre rather than at him. The stiff fabric of Andre's perfectly pressed uniform brushed against Elizabeth's designer dress as she positioned herself between the men. "I was actually in the middle of a conversation with Dr. Thompson," Marcus replied coolly, gesturing toward Andre. Elizabeth's eyes flickered over Andre's waiter's uniform with confusion before returning to Marcus. "Oh. Well, when you're finished, we'd love your expert opinion at our table." "I'm gathering field research tonight," Andre explained calmly to Marcus. "We'll catch up soon." Andre returned to his duties, aware that the dynamics in the restaurant had subtly shifted. Rachel watched him with new understanding, her earlier shame now mixed with curiosity. Dylan's posture changed whenever Andre passed, a newfound respect evident in his attentive gaze. The Whitfields, however, remained oblivious to Andre's true identity, focusing instead on their elaborate meal. The special dish arrived, a masterpiece of culinary artistry under a glass dome filled with aromatic smoke. As the dome was lifted, diners at nearby tables gasped appreciatively at the theatrical presentation. Harrison took a bite and frowned. The scratch of his fork against the plate created a discordant note in the restaurant's symphony of sounds. "This isn't right," he declared loudly. "The sauce is too reduced. And where's the manager? We need to speak with someone in charge immediately." The restaurant manager, Michael Okonkwo, appeared within moments, his demeanor calm and professional. "How may I assist you this evening, sir?" "This entire meal has been one disappointment after another," Harrison complained, despite having cleaned his plate. "First, we were assigned an inappropriate server. Then your chef initially refused our reasonable request. Now this dish is completely wrong. We expect the entire meal to be complimentary." Michael's controlled breathing was barely perceptible as he listened to the litany of fabricated grievances. "I'm terribly sorry to hear about your experience, Mr. Whitfield. Perhaps we can offer—" No, the entire bill should be comped. That's the only appropriate response." Harrison's voice carried deliberately, ensuring maximum audience for his power play. Throughout this exchange, Andre had been taking detailed notes in his small notebook, standing just within eyesight. The tightness of his grip on his pen betrayed the only sign of his internal reaction. Michael noticed Andre's note-taking and gave him a subtle nod, their pre-arranged signal. The Whitfields caught this exchange, Harrison's eyes narrowing. "What is that waiter doing? Is he writing something about us?" Andre approached the table with perfect composure. "Just improving our service model, sir. Every complaint is valuable data. Data? Are you studying us? Elizabeth's voice rose with indignation. That's completely inappropriate. We want him removed from the floor entirely. The kitchen door swung shut behind Andre, muffling the continued complaints from the Whitfields. The sudden transition from the dining room's hushed elegance to the kitchen's organized chaos was jarring. Stainless steel surfaces reflecting fluorescent lights, the sizzle of pans, and the percussive chopping of vegetables creating a completely different atmosphere. Chef Martine approached, wiping her hands on her apron. "You don't have to take this, you know," she said quietly. "We all know who you really are." Andre placed his notebook on a clean prep surface, flipping through pages dense with observations. Outwardly, he maintained his professional composure, but internally he was processing the accumulated slights of the evening, calculating their value against his dignity. 27 incidents of direct racial bias in high-end establishments this month alone, he noted, more to himself than to Martine. 63% resulted in staff members quitting within 2 weeks. The kitchen staff continued working around them, but their sidelong glances revealed their interest in the conversation. Dillon pushed through the door, his face flushed. "Dr. Thompson," he said, using Andre's title for the first time, "they're demanding that you be removed for the rest of their meal. The manager is stalling, but—" Andre nodded, unsurprised. This wasn't the first time he'd experienced such treatment. His mind flashed back to his first sommelier position at age 26. A customer had demanded to see the real wine expert, despite Andre's certified credentials. Then there was the incident at the James Beard dinner 3 years ago, where he'd been repeatedly mistaken for waitstaff despite being a featured chef. "Sometimes you need to document the disease before you can create the cure," Andre said finally, his voice steady as he reviewed his notes. Patterns emerged from the data, not just individual prejudices, but systemic issues that could be addressed through concrete policy changes. The restaurant staff watched him with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. Some had worked with him for weeks without knowing his true identity. Others, like Chef Martine, had been briefed on his actual role. All were now waiting to see how he would respond to this direct challenge. "Andre," Chef Martine said softly, "James gave you complete authority here. You could have them removed." A brief smile touched Andre's lips. That would be satisfying, but not educational. 2 months earlier, Andre had been in his consulting firm's office when James Chen called. The restaurant owner's voice had been tense with worry as he explained the situation at 14 tables. Increasing complaints about discriminatory treatment, 3 potential lawsuits from former employees, and declining reservations despite their sterling culinary reputation. "I need someone who understands both the business and cultural aspects," James had explained. "Your firm's work transforming Le Bernardin and 11 Madison Park is exactly what we need." Andre had agreed to take on the project personally, with one condition: complete immersion and authority. "I'll work as a server for 2 months before making any recommendations, and I'll need the power to implement changes as I see fit." James had agreed without hesitation. "Whatever it takes. 14 tables has been in my family for 2 generations. I can't lose it to outdated attitudes." Now, standing in the kitchen with the evidence of those outdated attitudes documented in his notebook, Andre considered his options. This wasn't just about the Whitfields. They were merely symptoms of a deeper problem. His research across Washington's top restaurants showed similar patterns. Staff of color leaving the industry at 3 times the rate of their white counterparts, with customer treatment cited as the primary reason. "This isn't about revenge," Andre said, addressing the kitchen staff who had gathered around him. "It's about education and accountability." Dillon stepped forward, his earlier nervousness replaced with quiet anger. "They don't deserve your help. I couldn't have handled that wine selection without you, and now they're treating you like—" He stopped, unable to find appropriate words. "Like someone beneath them," Andre finished for him. "That's precisely why this moment matters." He motioned for Michael, Chef Martine, Rachel, and Dillon to gather closer. I've been documenting similar incidents across Washington's top restaurants for my research. Tonight can be more than just another data point. It can be a case study in intervention. Andre outlined his plan quickly, assigning each person a specific role. This connected to his larger initiative, using data to create new industry standards for customer-staff interactions, backed by his consulting firm's influence with restaurant associations nationwide. "Remember," Andre said as they prepared to return to the dining room, "we're not just serving food tonight, we're serving perspective." Andre re-entered the dining room with renewed purpose, his steps measured and deliberate. The Whitfields were loudly holding court at their table, other diners visibly uncomfortable as Harrison recounted their terrible treatment to anyone within earshot. The couple had ordered the most expensive bottle of champagne on the menu, a $900 vintage Krug, seemingly to flaunt their status after the earlier confrontation. A sudden silence spread across the restaurant as Andre approached their table with quiet confidence. Dylan trailed behind him carrying a small tray with a fresh notepad and pen. The firm sound of Andre's shoes against the hardwood floor marked his approach like a metronome counting down to an inevitable conclusion. "Excuse me," Elizabeth Whitfield said immediately, her voice sharp with indignation. "We specifically asked not to be served by him." The cool leather of the chair beside her remained empty as no one moved to accommodate Andre's presence. Michael stepped forward, his manager's pin gleaming under the restaurant's soft lighting. "Dr. Thompson has something important to discuss with you." "Doctor?" Harrison scoffed, looking Andre up and down in his waiter's uniform. "He's a waiter. Is this some kind of joke?" Without waiting for an invitation, Andre pulled out the empty chair and sat down, placing his notebook between them on the white tablecloth. The gesture, calm but unmistakably assertive, caught the Whitfields off guard. For perhaps the first time that evening, they were speechless. "Dr. Andre Thompson," he introduced himself properly, Ph.D. in food chemistry, MBA from Wharton, and owner of Caliber Consulting, which specializes in transforming restaurant cultures. Harrison's mouth opened, then closed. Elizabeth's fingers tightened around her champagne flute. "For the past 6 weeks, I've been conducting research on discriminatory behavior in high-end restaurants," Andre continued, his tone conversational but precise. "Tonight, you've provided an excellent case study." The Whitfields attempted to interrupt, but Andre calmly raised his hand. The authority in the gesture silenced them instinctively. "In the past month alone, I've documented 47 incidents where servers of color were treated differently than their white colleagues." Andre opened his notebook, displaying meticulous documentation of their specific interactions. 23% of these incidents involved customers requesting different servers without valid service complaints. "This is outrageous," Harrison spluttered, his face reddening. "We didn't—" "Your exact words to Rachel were, and I quote, 'Surely you have someone more suitable for guests of our caliber.'" Andre's recitation was precise, without emotion. "You hadn't even been served water at that point, so your assessment couldn't have been based on service quality." Elizabeth shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Other diners had begun to listen intently, some discreetly recording on their phones. The Whitfields were becoming aware that they were no longer directing the scene, but were instead unwitting participants in someone else's script. "My research project extends beyond just documentation," Andre continued. "We're analyzing the economic impact of this behavior on the industry." He produced a tablet from Dylan's tray and displayed a series of graphs. "Qualified staff of color leave the hospitality industry at 3 times the rate of their white counterparts, citing customer treatment as the primary reason." The data was compelling. Bar charts showing turnover rates across 20 top restaurants, pie graphs breaking down reasons for resignation, and a particularly damning line graph showing correlation between discriminatory incidents and staff departures. "I'm not just your waiter. I'm your wake-up call." Andre's signature line cut through the air with quiet force. Harrison attempted to stand, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "We don't have to listen to this. We're paying customers." "Actually," Andre replied, You're documented research subjects now, and you have two choices. Leave and be recorded in my findings as unwilling to engage with the reality of your behavior, or stay and learn something valuable. The Whitfields exchanged glances, caught between embarrassment and curiosity. Around them, the restaurant had grown completely silent, all attention focused on their table. The prospect of walking out with dozens of eyes following their retreat clearly unsettled them. "Fine," Harrison said finally, sinking back into his seat. "Say whatever it is you need to say." Andre nodded appreciatively and shifted from accusation to education, his tone measured and professional. The hospitality industry loses approximately $3.4 billion annually due to discriminatory practices and their effects. He swiped through several screens of data. High staff turnover costs restaurants an average of $5,864 per employee to recruit and train replacements. Andre connected these abstract numbers to concrete human experiences, sharing anonymized stories from his research. He explained how qualified professionals left the industry after repeated demoralizing encounters, taking their talents elsewhere. The statistics were presented not as weapons, but as illumination, a way to understand the ripple effects of individual choices. "We just wanted someone with experience," Elizabeth offered defensively, her voice softer than before. "It wasn't about—" "Let me share my experience with you," Andre replied without rancor. He recounted his career journey, graduating top of his class at Cornell's hospitality school, training with master sommeliers across Europe, writing definitive texts on service excellence, and eventually founding a consulting firm that had transformed 5 prestigious restaurants facing discrimination lawsuits. "I've served 3 presidents, trained sommeliers at Michelin-starred restaurants, and lectured at hospitality programs worldwide," he concluded. "The irony is that you rejected the most qualified person in the room based solely on appearance." The Whitfield's realization dawned slowly but visibly. Harrison stared at his half-empty champagne glass, unable to meet Andre's steady gaze. Elizabeth nervously twisted her diamond bracelet, the same one that had caught the light earlier when she'd leaned in to request a different server. "So what happens now?" Harrison asked finally, his earlier bluster evaporated. "Are you going to throw us out? Have our names blacklisted from restaurants? Put us on some kind of social media wall of shame?" Andre studied them thoughtfully. This moment was crucial, the difference between temporary embarrassment and lasting change. "I'm offering you a choice: leave or stay, and experience true excellence in service." The restaurant held its collective breath. Even the kitchen staff had paused their work, peering through the swinging doors to witness the outcome. "We'll stay," Elizabeth said, surprising even her husband. Her voice contained a note of genuine curiosity beneath the lingering embarrassment. Andre nodded and stood. "Then allow me to serve you properly." What followed was a masterclass in fine dining service. Andre personally took over their table, demonstrating extraordinary knowledge and skill with an easy confidence that transformed the atmosphere. He created a customized tasting experience based on subtle cues they hadn't realized they were giving. Harrison's preference for bold flavors evidenced by his liberal use of freshly ground pepper, Elizabeth's appreciation for textural contrasts revealed by which parts of previous dishes she'd eaten first. Chef Martine emerged from the kitchen to join the educational experience, explaining the philosophy behind each dish while Andre paired them with wines from regions the couple had mentioned visiting. The precision of his wine pour caught the light, his confident voice explaining flavor profiles without condescension. Gradually, the Whitfields' tense shoulders relaxed as they found themselves genuinely engaged in the experience. "This Barolo has notes of dried cherry and rose petals," Andre explained, "similar to what you might have experienced in Piedmont during your anniversary trip." The fact that he'd remembered this detail from their earlier conversation with Dylan wasn't lost on Elizabeth, whose expression softened noticeably. Other diners watched the transformation with fascination as the table's atmosphere evolved from confrontational to collaborative. Dylan shadowed Andre, observing his techniques with undisguised admiration. The entire restaurant had become an impromptu classroom, the lesson extending far beyond the Whitfields. "How did you know I would prefer this dish?" Harrison asked, after his first bite of a specially prepared venison with juniper and black currant reduction. His tone contained genuine curiosity rather than challenge. "You mentioned enjoying hunting in your youth," Andre replied. "Game meats prepared with complementary bitter elements often appeal to those with that background." As the meal progressed, the Whitfields began asking genuine questions about the food, the restaurant, and eventually, Andre's research. Their arrogance had been replaced with interest, not complete understanding, but the beginning of awareness. By the time dessert arrived, a deconstructed apple tart with 5 textures of caramel, Harrison awkwardly attempted an apology. "I didn't realize. That is, we didn't intend to." "Understanding takes time," Andre said, meeting his fumbling words with grace. "Tonight is just the beginning of that process." The statement wasn't just for the Whitfields. Around them, other diners had witnessed a rare moment of transformation. Discomfort converted to education, prejudice confronted with professionalism rather than anger. Andre knew from experience that some would dismiss the encounter, but others would carry it with them, perhaps examining their own behaviors more carefully in the future. Elizabeth looked around at the other tables, suddenly aware of how many people had been watching their interaction. "Everyone has been staring at us all night, haven't they?" "People are drawn to authentic moments," Andre replied. "Even uncomfortable ones. Especially uncomfortable ones." As the Whitfields prepared to leave, Harrison insisted on paying the full bill plus a substantial tip. The credit card he handed Michael had barely left his fingers before he turned to Andre with an awkward formality. "We'd like to speak to the owner," Harrison said, his tone carefully neutral. "To commend your service." A small smile played at the corner of Michael's mouth. "Mr. Chen is currently in Hong Kong, but as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Thompson has been granted full operational authority during his research period." This final revelation landed with visible impact. Elizabeth's perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth while Harrison blinked rapidly, processing the implications. You run the restaurant?" Elizabeth asked. "Temporarily," Andre clarified, "as part of my firm's assessment process." Before either Whitfield could respond, a ripple of applause began from a nearby table. Marcus Chen, the food critic, had stood and was openly acknowledging Andre's handling of the situation. The applause spread quickly throughout the dining room, growing in enthusiasm. The Whitfields, now thoroughly humbled, appeared unsure how to react, as they found themselves at the center of attention for reasons entirely different than they'd intended. The unexpected sound of applause filled the restaurant, reaching even the kitchen staff who peered through the swinging doors with satisfied smiles. "Dr. Thompson?" a woman at a nearby table called out, rising from her seat. "The same thing happened to my daughter last month at Rosetta's downtown. She quit her server job the next day." A man in his 60s joined in. "I've been in hospitality for 40 years, and what you did tonight was long overdue in this industry." Rachel approached the group, her earlier nervousness replaced with resolve. "I want to apologize publicly," she said, addressing both Andre and the room at large. "I should have handled the initial situation differently. I enabled discriminatory behavior by accommodating it." The warm handshakes from strangers expressing gratitude and sharing experiences created a spontaneous community forum. Andre accepted each interaction with grace, the weight of responsibility evident in his thoughtful responses. The Whitfields edged toward the exit, clearly overwhelmed by the turn of events. Before leaving, Harrison handed Andre a business card. "If you're willing," he said quietly, "we'd like to learn more about your research. Perhaps we could—" He trailed off, seemingly unable to find appropriate words. "I'll be in touch," Andre promised, pocketing the card. "This isn't about punishment. It's about progress." 1 week later, 14 tables buzzed with a different energy. Staff moved with renewed confidence. Interactions between servers and patrons had a more authentic quality, and the traditional hierarchy that had defined fine dining for decades seemed subtly but fundamentally shifted. Andre stood at the head of the private dining room, presenting his complete findings to the full restaurant staff and James Chen, who had returned from Hong Kong specifically for this meeting. Charts and graphs projected on the wall illustrated the patterns Andre had documented over his 6-week immersion. "The data is clear," Andre explained, gesturing to a particularly telling correlation between staff retention and inclusive practices. Restaurants implementing these 5 key policies show an average increase in staff retention of 67% and customer satisfaction improvements of 23%. The new policies being outlined were straightforward but revolutionary for an establishment like 14 Tables. Zero tolerance for customer discrimination, staff empowerment protocols, customer education initiatives, and transparent reporting systems. "This isn't just about doing what's right," Andre continued. "It's about business sustainability. High turnover costs this restaurant approximately $237,000 annually." James Chen nodded thoughtfully, making notes on his tablet. "And the training program you've proposed?" Andre clicked to the next slide, showing a comprehensive staff development system. 8 weeks, focused not just on service techniques, but on confidence, communication, and conflict resolution. Rachel, seated in the front row, raised her hand. "Will the diversity coordinator position be permanent?" "Yes," Andre confirmed. "And you're my top recommendation for the role, to be combined with your hostess duties with appropriate compensation adjustment." Dylan, who had been unusually quiet during the meeting, spoke up. "What about the sommelier training you mentioned?" "Already arranged," Andre replied with a small smile. "Caliber Consulting will sponsor 3 staff members annually. Your application was received yesterday." As the meeting concluded, Chef Martine approached Andre with a proposal of her own. "I've been thinking about those educational dining events you suggested. I've drafted a 6-month curriculum." Andre reviewed her notes with approval. "The first event is already generating interest. We're sold out, with a waiting list." "I saw the guest list," Martine said with raised eyebrows. "The Whitfields reserved 2 seats." Andre nodded, unsurprised. People can surprise you when given the opportunity to grow. 1 month later, Andre stood in his firm's office overlooking the Potomac River, watching a news segment on the mounted television. The chyron read, "Service Revolution, Transforming Restaurant Culture." The reporter's voice was animated. "What began as one confrontation at 14 Tables has sparked a movement across Washington's dining scene. 5 other high-end establishments have now adopted what's being called the Thompson Protocols, creating new standards for addressing discrimination in hospitality." The camera cut to a diverse group of servers at a trendy Georgetown restaurant, their testimonials intercut with footage of packed dining rooms and satisfied patrons. "I've worked in restaurants for 12 years, said one veteran server with graying temples. "This is the first time I've felt truly respected by both management and customers." Andre's phone buzzed with messages from industry organizations requesting his training materials. The American Hospitality Association wanted him to keynote their annual conference. Cornell's Hotel School had offered him a guest lectureship. Most surprisingly, a congressional committee on workplace discrimination had invited him to testify about systemic changes needed in service industries. His assistant knocked and entered with a printed article. "You might want to see this," she said, handing him the Washington Post's food section. The headline read, "From Bias to Advocacy, One Couple's Unexpected Journey." The accompanying photo showed Harrison and Elizabeth Whitfield at a restaurant industry fundraiser for diversity scholarships. Andre scanned the article, pausing at Elizabeth's quoted interview. "Sometimes the best education comes from your worst behavior being exposed. What Dr. Thompson did wasn't just confront us. He showed us the real human and economic costs of unexamined privilege." The article detailed how the Whitfields had become unlikely advocates, sharing their experience in Houston's oil industry social circles and hosting discussions about unconscious bias at their country club. Andre placed the article in a folder labeled Outcomes, adding it to dozens of similar stories he'd collected. The ripple effects were spreading further than he had initially anticipated, touching not just those directly involved in the confrontation, but extending to others who heard the story secondhand. His phone buzzed again, a text from James Chen. Reservations up 43% this month. Staff turnover 0. When can you start on our Paris location? Andre smiled and texted back, "Let me finish my book first." 6 months later, Andre sat in his office surrounded by data from dozens of restaurants across the country. What had begun as a focused research project at 14 tables had expanded into a movement, with a waiting list of establishments seeking similar transformations. On his desk lay the final manuscript for his upcoming book, Serving Change, Transforming Hospitality Culture from the Inside Out. The case study of the Whitfields now formed a central chapter, illustrating how confrontation, when handled with professionalism and data-driven clarity, could lead to meaningful change. Andre reviewed a report from his expanded team of consultants, now 12 professionals from diverse backgrounds, each implementing his methodology in different markets. The statistics were encouraging. Staff diversity up by an average of 31% across client restaurants, customer complaints down 17%, and profits increasing despite initial concerns about alienating traditional patrons. A handwritten note from the Whitfields had arrived that morning. "Our perspective continues to evolve," Harrison had written. "We're implementing similar standards in our corporate offices. The results have been eye-opening." Andre placed the note alongside dozens of others from servers, chefs, and restaurant owners who had either witnessed his approach firsthand or adopted his protocols. What had begun as documentation of a problem had transformed into a blueprint for solving it. Later that afternoon, Andre stood before his closet, selecting a crisp white shirt and black slacks, the uniform he would wear for his first day researching at a new establishment. Despite his growing fame in the industry, he remained committed to his immersive approach. Respect isn't earned through status. It's the baseline for human interaction, he reminded himself as he straightened his tie, the same words that would appear on the dedication page of his book. Has a moment of disrespect ever changed your life? Or have you witnessed someone turn discrimination into a powerful teaching moment like Andre did? This is why we created Beat Stories, to showcase real-life experiences where dignity overcomes discrimination, where quiet power speaks louder than prejudice. If Andre's story resonated with you, take a moment right now to hit that subscribe button and join our community who believe in the power of these transformative moments. Drop a comment below sharing your own experience with workplace discrimination or a time when you stood up for yourself with quiet dignity. Your story could be the exact inspiration someone else needs today. Hit that like button if you believe, like Andre, that the most powerful response to disrespect isn't anger, it's excellence. Each like helps this story reach someone who might be facing their own Table 14 moment right now. Turn on notifications so you never miss our weekly uploads of powerful true stories that show the best of humanity rising above the worst. And if you know someone struggling with workplace discrimination or bias, share this video with them. Sometimes knowing you're not alone makes all the difference. Beat Stories, where real life beats fiction every time. Subscribe now and become part of the change we want to see. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.
Sometimes the most powerful revolutions don't come with noise, just one person standing their ground. At Beat Stories, we highlight those moments that shift the balance. If this story moved you, hit subscribe, because every week we bring real stories that shake the system.